All right, good afternoon. I have a new company today on Goldfingered Capital, Metallis Resources, MTS on the TSX venture. You know, Metallis is a company that came to my attention a couple months ago because they have the Greyhound project in central Idaho. You know, I love the state of Idaho for mining and exploration. So I've been following them the last couple of months, just sort of passively. And now I decided it's time to actually have a conversation with the team and learn more about the company. So I'm with Carl Ryan, who's project head geologist for the company, and Dave Webb, who's also a board member and now is actually going to be a technical advisor. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing good. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you, Robert. And yeah, looking forward to the chat.
I'm doing well out here. Clearly, just waiting for Christmas to start.
All right, so let's get into who you guys are. I think both of you are new to my audience and maybe new to a few investors in this sector. So tell us about your background. We'll start with you, Carl.
So I'm well, I've been with this team for about 7 years now. I'm a geologist, and so I've been the guy on the ground. I was out at the Greyhound this summer for the whole program pretty well, and I've been working extensively behind the scenes and on the property to complete the drill program. I was a part of the acquisition of the property, doing the due diligence, and yeah, I've been with Metallis, like I said, for 7 years. So been working in the Golden Triangle on their Kirkham property previously, along with a couple other companies along the road in various jurisdictions across North America. So happy to be a part of the team and to be working down in beautiful Idaho, and yeah, moving forward with this project.
And I'm Dave Webb. I've been involved with Fiore and other companies, but in with Metallis for quite a while now, and I've known Carl for his full time here. I've got an engineering degree from the University of Toronto. I've got a master's degree in geology. I've got a PhD in geology, and my specialty coming out of university was finding high-grade vein deposits. That was my thesis topic, and I've turned that around with the engineering degree to bring some properties into production. So I was asked to step up a little bit more now and help describe and explain what these results mean and what the Greyhound property has the potential to be.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. So let's talk about the Greyhound property and why you were attracted to it. Like, what had you acquire this project in the first place?
Yeah, so Metallis has been, I guess previously we were exploring the Golden Triangle, and in 2023 we've been looking for properties for a while, new properties with better seasonality. So that was a big criteria we wanted to complete, and potentially the easier fundraising potentially in the States. So we started looking in jurisdictions in America, and then we started, well, it was around the same time that the Hercules discovery was made. And so 2024, we turned our attention quite intently to Idaho, and we got introduced to a fellow named Dan Yonke, who is the owner of the Greyhound property, and his family has been the owners of the Greyhound property for over 60 years. And so we kind of found this diamond in the rough that hadn't had any exploration work done on it. It was historically mined. It was mined in the early 1900s, like a lot of things in Idaho, small scale mining. And then in the 1980s, Dan and his family were in there, and they pushed and added 1,500 feet into the mountain, and they actually mined stuff. They mined good ore. They made money. And we looked at this property. Since then, no work has been done. There's been no exploration, no geophysics, no soil sampling, no good geological mapping. So we saw a great opportunity to work on that and bring modern techniques to the forefront in a jurisdiction that was hot in the States, in Idaho. And we were also quite bullish on silver as a commodity. And it also had this secondary level of a few reports had historic talks of antimony, which is a metal that's caught people's attention in the last few years. So it had a lot of things, ticked a lot of boxes for us. And that was 2024. So we got our first field program done that summer. That was, soil samples, rock sampling, the basics, and we liked what we saw. And so we pushed along for another year, and that was what brought us to this past summer doing a drill program, 1,600 meters. We completed, just finished it, wrapped it up in October, end of October. And yeah, that's where we are now. We put out news on the first 7 of 11 holes, and maybe your viewers have seen that, maybe they haven't, but happy to go into those details as the call progresses.
Okay, and so, bigger picture, what really drew you into this, aside from the state of Idaho, aside from the fact it's in relative proximity to Perpetua's, stibnite mine, which obviously has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of years, but what really said, hey, we need to get this project and we need to get a drill rig out there to test some of these targets? Like, what really caught your attention when you actually got your boots on the ground the first time there at Greyhound?
Totally. Good question. Because the big picture is all that stuff. That's why, I'm doing all the work on the computer, and we say, hey, let's get a flight. Let's go take a look. What drew us in, and I guess, I will say part of it was stuff that we couldn't see. 2 factors, let's say. One being the historic reporting that we read, and there is stuff on the mining that was done, but specifically there was channel sampling completed in the 1980s, late 1980s, that in the underground mining, they did systematic channel sampling down the adit, and those results were quite spectacular. And specifically, there was a zone called the 1350 where they channel sampled 2 meters wide, about every 2 meters down the adit. And they ended up with continuously, if you averaged all those channel samples, 36 meters down the adit, so a long strike, you averaged 785 grams per ton silver and 1.85 grams per ton gold. And the average width of those channels was 1.5 meters. So that in our head was, that's a mineralized body, that's economic, and this has never been drilled. So as much as that was the initial aha moment of, it's not someone selling us on a rock sample at surface, it's not someone saying, I swear it's great. These were real numbers from an underground adit that showed potential for economic mineralization. So that was the big, okay, we got to get some flights. Round 2 was us going down to the property and meeting Dan Yonke, and to see someone who, Dan's maybe 60, 65 now. He was doing the mining himself as an 18-year-old, and he was underground, and you could see the passion he had for this project that was both infectious and something that we could rally behind ourselves. So Dan has been really, I guess, instrumental in helping us see the picture and helping us he's not a geologist by trade, but he's been underground in a lot of mines, and he's been working in the mining industry his whole life. So he knew a lot, and he was able to take us to some lovely showings right off the bat. And, the rock samples that came back from that first drill program were 1 to 5% antimony, thousands up to 5,000, 4,000 grams per ton silver. Good widths, lots of showings, all over the property. We were getting good kicks. The soil samples outlined a nice trend. And so everything from that initial program also backed up the work we had seen online and got us excited to bring the drill rig in.
Okay, very good. And just one more question sort of about the project background for those who don't understand this, because there was, historical mining activity on this ground at one time, and the old timers were pulling out high grade silver and gold at various times in the past, right? So how does a project like that, where there's metal there, not get drilled in modern times? It's kind of mind blowing, especially in Canada. This would have been drilled already, right?
Yeah, I mean, Dave, I saw you smile. Maybe you have a few comments to add there. I think, you know, historically in Idaho, there's a few of these types of things where people they're making money mining, and they don't need to play the junior mining game, and so they're happily just sending it to the mill and making, returning cash. So there's obviously, I think it's a bit a nature of the deposit style, these high grade systems that are a little smaller. They lend themselves to mining better, and they are also somewhat difficult to drill because they can be, you got high grades and you got low grades, and defining resources can be a bit tricky. So that is maybe part of it. But it is a jurisdiction that I think has also just been overlooked. Idaho's got one of the most, the silver belt in northern Idaho is one of the most prolific silver belts in the world. You've had two major mining companies come out of a little patch that's about 20 kilometers long. Core Mining and Hecla were both started in Idaho there. So it's obviously a prolific district, and I think it's now just getting a light shone on it, and is great to see. It feels like discoveries are going to be made. And, I think it's a nature of the deposit styles.
Yeah, and that's just it. It is, I spent a lot of my, I started in the mining business back in the 70s. So I was a driller's helper, and I worked my way through, and I worked in the mines. I was a reserve resource geologist. I was a production geologist. I was a research geologist. And what struck me as I'm giving tours to the big companies that are passing through the mining towns that I was working in was that these exploration geologists had never seen a mine. They'd seen it on paper. They knew what it should look like, but to take them underground on a tour and say, yeah, this is where we're mining, they were just astounded. And it just struck me as most exploration geologists don't really know what they're looking for. They just want a really big intersection, really great grades. And if they don't get, 20, 30 meters of super high grade material, they're flummoxed. They just don't know what to do. And I looked at these results and I just thought, wow, we've done it. You have to understand the beast. What does the average quartz vein, what does the average vein deposit look like in the silver belt in Idaho? These company building deposits, how big are they? And when you find out that, well, they're inches to maybe 4 or 5 or 6 feet on average, if you have anything anywhere near that, you have some potential. Well, not only did we have that, but it had already been mined, so we could demonstrate the continuity, we could demonstrate the metallurgy, we could demonstrate the grades. I just remember looking at things like the cobalt silver camp in Cobalt, Ontario, where you're dealing with deposits that's the vein. Of course, it's pure silver. Or the Camsell silver camp in Great Bear Lake area of Northwest Territories. Again, it's this big, but it's running 1,000 ounces per ton. You don't need a lot of that. And we've had the advantage in the last 50 years that we've now, trackless mining is really common. You see in northern Idaho at the mines are now, Hecla's now doing an underhand bench mining, a completely new technique. It's an old technique, but application today, it's new. If we look at these vein deposits, you only need 0.1, 0.2 meters to make something that could be economically mined. We don't have to take out a 6 foot wide zone. We can take out a 3 foot wide zone. We can take out less than that. There's ways you can mine it. So these are good results, and they can be built upon. We have demonstrated that the grades are there. Historically, it's been mined. So this is fantastic in a great jurisdiction with mills nearby, and certainly a mindset in the regulators to let's get this thing going.
Yeah, so my readers at Goldfinger Capital are no stranger to the virtues of the state of Idaho for mining, and definitely there's plenty of content if you just go in the search box and you type in Idaho or Stibnite or Perpetua. you'll see a lot there, a lot of content, including what the federal government is doing in terms of potentially building new smelters and other processing sort of infrastructure, plans to build that infrastructure in the state of Idaho. So that's a major sea change that's taking place here. And you know, I'll just add a little bit here. You know, the mining industry in the US went through a little bit of a revival in the 70s with the gold and silver bull market, but then 1980 came about and the Fed raised the Fed funds rate to over 20% and gold and silver crashed and the bear market began, right? And then Bill Clinton became president in the 90s and sort of, you know, weaponized the environmental side of the government, and mining went into a big dormancy, especially in Idaho. Basically, a lot of mines shut down throughout the 90s in Idaho. And so, like what you said, Carl, at the start of the conversation about the discovery of, you know, Hercules, they drilled that deeper hole that found the porphyry copper deposit there in the western side of the state. I mean, it's literally, that was the revival point. Like, that sort of set things off again, and we're only 2 years from that, you know, discovery hole. So things are still very early stages here in Idaho, and in terms of the revival of hard rock mining in the US. So, you know, when you wrap your head around the, you know, history of these things, it helps to understand how a project like, you know, Greyhound, they just mined it 100 years ago, but it hasn't been drilled in modern times. So let's talk about modern exploration techniques and the work that led up to the drill program there. So you know, what was the groundwork, the foundational work that you guys did since acquiring the project that set the stage for the first pass program?
Yeah, great question. I just wanted to talk slightly about the property, something I forgot to mention that is quite important and kind of sheds light on, you know, in places like BC, where I've worked a little more extensively in Canada, you got to continue to do work on properties, otherwise your claims lapse. This property is on patent claims, so that's a huge asset to us, and it means that something can sit dormant for years and it doesn't have to have any work done on it. It doesn't have to have any reporting. It's essentially treated like private property. So that was, you know, another reason for it having sat dormant for a number of years since the 80s and early 90s, as you hit a nail on the head there, where things went quiet. The other side of that is that it's great for us for permitting and lack thereof, in a way. We still obviously have to make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's, but it means that we've been able to, you know, build roads quite efficiently, and we've been able to use water from the property quite efficiently for the drill program, and do things like, well, let's answer your question there for starters. When we did pick up the property, we also staked an area outside of the patent claims, and we went in there with, you know, we weren't reinventing the wheel, but we were definitely doing things that they weren't doing in the, you know, in the 80s. And so, you know, for the first pass program, we were actually doing soil samples mostly. We were looking at, you know, channel samples, geological mapping. And I think what, you know, my favorite advancement from that first program, we took, I don't know, 700 soil samples, something like that, was that we had an XRF gun with us, and we were zapping the soils every night when we got back to camp. So it's hot down in Idaho. We'd get up nice and early. We'd collect our 50, 60 samples each, and then peak day, you know, 2 o'clock, we'd come back and we'd zap them with the XRF gun. And that day we were getting results where we'd go, hey, I didn't think I was over top of a showing today. Did you see anything? And my buddy, you know, the other guy I'm working with, who was 100 meters the line to the north, he going, yeah, actually, I got great results right from sample 64 to 68 or whatever it was. And we look at it in the map and we go, well, that's a new zone. We didn't know that was there. There's no old showings there. And so we went back, and what we've since turned this spot the Akita. And you know, because we were able to get results that day, we were able to go back, collect rock samples, dig around, take a few more soil samples, and we've outlined a great soil anomaly There's a fair bit of overburden. There's what I would call subcrop that's really well mineralized. And so we're on to something there. And that's obviously something that I think part of the reason this showing, let's call it, wasn't actually even identified before was because the back half of this property has had a major forest fire about 5 years ago. And so one of the main subcrop showings is literally sitting underneath this spindly, what, might have been a bushy tree at some point and is now nothing more than a 4-inch stalk. And so just in terms of, the progression of the property, little things like forest fires, but then obviously bringing in our expertise with things like having XRF technology and doing soil samples and looking at potential outside of what they mined historically. And to elaborate as well, we also did a magnetic survey this past spring. And so we're using techniques that, they wouldn't have been looking at. We're looking at property potential here. We're not just looking at one specific zone. And so having something like a drone magnetic survey giving us great databases that help us with structures and understanding which way orientations are going and geological mapping, which dikes are going where and things of that nature. We have a lot more tools at our disposal and we're using all the ones we can. We've looked into other geophysical techniques. They're not off the table, but there are, induced polarization is something we've looked at. And Dave, we were just having a conversation yesterday about some potentially, some other techniques that might be able to pick up these bodies that are vertically dipping. That can be tricky traditionally with geophysics. Talking to our geophysicist, he's like, we don't love chasing vertical structures that don't have a lot of, vertical continuity, yes, but maybe not continuous strike. So those are hard sometimes for geophysical things to pick up. But it's a work in progress, and we're throwing the kitchen sink at it. And we do obviously have, I think just also the vision for the property is different than it would have been in the 1990s, where it was, okay, what's the next foot of the adit going to bring? Whereas we're looking at the width, we're looking at the length. This thing's 3.5 kilometers long this year. So there's a lot of potential for good zones along that whole strike length.
Yeah, let's talk about the bigger picture potential, and maybe Dave can field this question. So it's basically a quartz sulfide vein system that's hosted in this shear zone that extends for 3,600 or more meters, with these multiple zones along it where there was some, artisanal mining activity at some point in the past. Just tell us about the scale potential that you see along this, extensive shear zone. How far do these vein systems extend to depth? Can they fatten, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, defining the structures is the first order of business there. So we've known that it has potentially economic mineralization, and mineralization that was ore in the past. So that's a done deal. The length of the structure with scattered mineralization along it, sometimes ore grade looking material, that's the next step. I would not expect, and you don't get it in the Silver Valley in Idaho, continuous mineralization for thousands of meters. It doesn't happen. So you're not drilling into a sheet, you're drilling into maybe a screen where you're aiming to get certain parts, but there's more blanks than there are going to be mineralized zones. And you can build on that. One of the outcomes from the drilling was a parallel system, a system that wasn't known. We just have got such limited exploration because in the past, once the prospectors, the artisanal miners found something, they develop it. That's what they worked on, including Dan. He had a really great zone and he developed that and worked on that. He didn't go exploring. He wasn't really looking for a lot of other zones. This one was keeping him active. We have the capacity, we can do that. So if you have, like you do at the Lucky Friday or Sunshine or any of these other zones, you get one of these zones, you develop that, you can develop above it, below it, and along strike you might find other zones or parallel zones to it. So you're looking for a multiple stope per level kind of system. In addition, there's always a porphyry model, and we've known that there's some odd geophysics in the area historically, just by photogrammetry, looking at interesting looking arcuate structures. Maybe there's an intrusion over there. Maybe something's going on, and you don't see it on surface. There's no visual impact on it. So we can develop on all of that, and the sampling and mapping that Carl and the team have been doing are not just telling us that this rock is a basalt and this is a gray wacky. They're now telling us that this is an altered unit. This one's got a little bit of an odd mineral in it that is typically telling you that it was at a higher temperature. So we can build on that.
Okay, let's talk about the Maiden drill program at Greyhound, and specifically, let's start with the 1350 zone. So when I saw this news release, I said, well, hole 2505 is very encouraging. It's a very good result from hole 2505. Hole 2506, not so great. Hole 2507 is interesting. Definitely not as good as 2505, but it's not a bad result. Tell us your takeaways and what you learned from these three holes at the 1350 zone.
Yeah, definitely the meat and potatoes of why we're here and why we're here. Why we do this work. We're here to put drill holes and get good intersections. And the 1350 for us was 100% a success. That was, we were quite excited with. Let's put it this way: we had originally just planned 2 drill holes on the 1350, one above the adit and one below the adit, scissored. And we were excited with the first 2 holes, so we decided to spin the drill 30 degrees and drill the, what was hole 7. And so speaking through results, as the one that was out there taking, seeing it as it came out of the ground, I think obviously for those that have followed the story, hole 5 was great. We had intersects of 1.5 meters of 795 grams per ton silver equivalent. And so that's an economic number right there from our standpoint, and it's exactly what we expected. It's one thing to have it in historic data underground in an adit that we've never been into ourselves. So when we had that in the first drill hole, we were quite excited, and as we should be. In it showed this high grain band. I shouldn't quite go that. It was 15 centimeters, and that band is carrying something like I think it's over 0.15 centimeters, and it's carrying, I think, just under 5,000 grams per ton silver equivalent. So that's the juice for this system. And knowing that is there, and speaking to Dan, that's what we need to get into more of. And I have no doubt that we will get into more of that. And it can be wider.
For a second there, Carl, because that's in the news release. Okay, so the photo of that drill core, and it's on this video too now as you're watching. 3,050 grams per ton silver, 7.82 grams per ton gold, 5% antimony. That's incredible grade. So when you look at that, when that core came out of the ground and you saw it, like, what do you see there? Like, can you walk us through what you're seeing there in that sulfide vein?
Totally. Yeah. Well, to be honest, it was us getting into the zone. We got into the zone a touch earlier than I anticipated. We're trying to line things up with historic georeferencing, and you never know until you put the drill on it. So for starters, we were getting into good mineralization. This was hole 5, and you're starting to see sulfide veins come up. So you're maybe 20 meters out. Okay, you get a 10 centimeter sulfide arsenopyrite vein. You don't know what it runs at that point, but it's obviously pointing in the right direction. You're starting to get alteration that's suggesting you're getting close to the shear. You're getting more chloride alteration, increased sulfide content. And then I wouldn't say abruptly, but quite distinctly, we got into the shear zone. And that was what, I guess in that orientation would be the hanging wall. And so pretty much, you might have had a meter of shearing, and then you were into this quartz sulfide vein. So quite competent. As you can see from that photo that is on there, it's quite shiny. So there's a fair bit of quartz in there, and you're getting this smearing of the galena, which is the lead mineral, which when you drill it, it's a very soft mineral, so it kind of smears out, and you can identify it quite quickly because it pings back at you in the light. And as soon as we're getting that galena, I know that we're in decent grade. And so when that came out of the ground, I thought, I was pretty confident that, hey, this is a nice zone, and it's about 0.5 meter of good stuff, and there's a little gap, and then another 30 to 40 centimeters. But that's your hanging wall mineralization that we were very excited to see. And I don't have x-ray glasses, so I wasn't able to tell how much antimony was in there. I was confident there was some antimony in there. I was quite pleased to see 5% antimony in there. And then carrying down the hole, there's continued shearing. And then the way these systems often work is that you might have a shear zone. So it's important to understand that a shear zone is not necessarily entirely mineralized, but that's where the rocks have deformed past each other. And quite often you get veins on the hanging wall and the foot wall predominantly. And sometimes they'll jump over and shift to the other side. And it's kind of a constant dance to be on the best part of the system. But on the foot wall, we also ran into another good zone of mineralization, which was, a meter of, don't quote me off the top of my head, but another good quartz sulfide vein that was well mineralized. That was about 6 meters away from that other one. And it didn't have the galena content, so it didn't quite have that super high spike of silver, but it was, another good vein that shows a robust system. And then 50 meters downhole, we blindly, I was about to shut the drill hole down, and we got into some metasediments that usually are associated to the shearing as the rocks moving past each other like lithology changes. So I thought, let's go a little bit farther. And sure enough, on the other side of that metaseds, there was another bonus zone, which we've also seen in hole 7. And so that's been, Dave alluded, we've got parallel systems showing up here too. So hole 5 was a great success in that standpoint. We got into the high grade, we proved really that this thing is capable of some pretty spectacular grades. And as soon as you get a little more width on that, or, at that grade, the hole 5, those are economic numbers, and this system is showing that it's got the grade. So that was hole 5. I'll move somewhat quickly. Hole 6 was, for me, I'll be honest, a bit of a letdown. We always are hoping for the best. And when I drilled it, hole 6 was actually looking really promising. There's something like 18 meters of quartz sulfide veining. So there's a lot of pyrite, there's a lot of arsenopyrite, which is usually very well correlated with gold and silver results. So I actually brought a box home from hole 6 thinking that it was going to be a lovely piece of show core. And I wish I was right, in these systems, it's all part of the learning process. It's exploration. We're drilling something that's never been drilled before. And, 18 meters of quartz sulfide is a great start in a system like this. Unfortunately, it didn't have the gold, silver results that we wanted, but at the end of the day, it's still showing a robust mineralized system that undoubtedly is still going to depth and is still going strong. And you could have drilled a meter away and gotten a totally different result. So I wasn't actually, at big picture, I wasn't that disappointed with hole 6. I just know that in the early days, it's very important for getting across the potential having the grade. So overall, hole 6, albeit a little disappointing from a grade standpoint, I'm still quite encouraged with the fact that it was a very long run of high sulfide mineralization. And we obviously have the shear there. It's still going down to depth. So I think people should still be excited about that. And hole 7 was kind of a bonus hole. We spun the drill 30 degrees to the south and shot it along the shear. And again, we had a very long run of sulfide, but this one did have 2 kicks of high silver. So there's a couple kicks. There's 0.35 meters of 1100 grams per ton silver equivalent, and then another half meter lower down of, I think, 12 grams per ton silver equivalent, all spread out within about 15 meters. So to be honest, hole 7 is kind of what I expected out of hole 6 too. A couple high kicks, 15 meters of shear that is all fairly well mineralized. And when you spread that out, it actually is fairly substantial. It's like 142 grams per ton silver equivalent over 15 meters, because almost every sample came back with a bit of grade. So hole 7 was the strike extension that showed, okay, 70 meters long strike, we're still in this system. And within the 3 holes, you've now got a zone that we can start to be confident in drilling next season with. It's open in every direction is the bottom line there. And it's, I'd say 2 out of 3 hit great grade. They all hit good shear. And so we're excited to go back to the 1350. And it's the type of thing where you can already start putting numbers to the back of the envelope and get excited about, okay, this is real. And, it's up to us to expand on the 1350. These systems can go, well, as Lucky Friday in Northern Ontario shows, these systems can go 2 kilometers down. So it's definitely going to be a focus of ours next year to continue dipping down on what we've seen here, drilling it to depth and drilling it along strike. And yeah, we're totally pleased with what we've seen at the 1350. And it's really proof of concept for this property that there is high grade, that it holds together in continuity, and that these mineralized pods are vertically dipping, and we just got to find a few more and we're off to the races.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting about hole 6, that you actually liked what you saw at first, and then the assays were a bit of a letdown. That's interesting. Do you feel that that hole might have just narrowly, missed a higher grade area?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Dave can speak to this because he's got a lot of experience in mining scenarios with high grade systems. But, I'd love to say that every shear zone is a continuous plate that looks like, it's going to be perfectly the same every time you strike it, but that's not the case. These things are bifurcating, they're splitting off, they're splays. Dave, I'll maybe let you expand on your, what is it, drill for grade and drill for structure and drive for grade is a bit the concept that we were pleased with what we'd seen from a structural standpoint, and showing that it's that the system is there, and that a meter over, I mean, I've seen it at surface. You can sample something at surface and then right beside it, it might not be as high. But by the time you actually bring in a mining scenario, or you average a bunch of holes, you're going to have a pretty substantial grade. And Dave, I'll let you expand on that slightly.
Yeah, you stole my drill for structure, drive for grade. But I mean, that was one of the first things I was taught in an ore reserve course. But I was working at an underground mine at the time, and we knew that adage, that mentality that these things are not homogeneous distributions of grade. They're the most inhomogeneous deposits you can possibly come up against. And I told the group that I was quite pleased with the results, and I'll give you 2 examples. I can give you a dozen examples, but one that I use a lot is a mine that I worked on, and I looked up the discovery of that mine, the deposit, and the deposit was a very nice looking 2-meter wide vein going for 100 meters, and it had some good grade distribution in it, but there was a potentially ore grade zone running about 25 meters long, one of these chutes that you might be looking for. And that company in 1936 puts 14 diamond drill holes into that zone, and it averaged 5 grams of gold per ton, which in 1936 is waste rock over 2 meters. I mean, that's something that you'd walk away from. It came out at 5.3 grams of gold per ton. But that company understood the inhomogeneity of these deposits. They sunk a shaft, big capital costs. They brought a mill in, and they extracted 44,000 tons of what they hoped was going to be ore, and they recovered 34,000 ounces of gold. So it actually averaged about 24 grams of gold per ton, way higher than the diamond drill results, and much higher than the surface sampling. They ended up producing in that mine, took out 12 million tons at 0.5 ounce of gold per ton. So it was a massive deposit, very profitable, kind of an earth-shattering, maybe not world-class, but certainly national class deposit. And the drilling gave it nothing. There's a similar deposit in the area where they took out 1 million tons at 1 ounce per ton. And I gathered all the stope samples. So this is just like what Greg did when he was mining down the 1350 zone. He took samples every 2 meters. Well, they'd done this when they were mining. So not only did they do that horizontally, but they did it vertically. And when they took out the stope, I could look at it and consolidate it, and they had 2/3 of the stope averaged waste. Yet they took out 1 million tons at 1 ounce per ton. So you have to understand this. This is something that I've got to drive home to any investor or anyone who's thinking about things. Do not expect 100% hits in these zones. You're really lucky if you get 1 out of 3 hits. That is what the typical ore body looks like. But you have to understand how you can develop it. And the best thing to do is, what do your neighbors look like? What do these deposits look like in the area? Is there anyone else with a silver, lead, zinc, antimony mineralization in the area? And you might get everything from the stibnite mine, which is more of an open pit. And that actually might just be a cluster of these narrow zones. Or you can get the galena mine, where they're now mining and they're successfully extracting at 3-foot widths. These are the stopes. So yeah, that's what we're looking for. And if we find something like that, we should be very happy. We should be excited. And I am. Apparently the market wasn't, but that might just be a leading expectations. We're expecting 100% success over 13, 15 meters. And that just doesn't exist in northern Idaho.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dave. And it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of investors might hear what you just said and say, well, only 1 of 3 holes are going to hit. And then they say, well, why go after this kind of a model then if only 1 of 3 hit? You know, we want to hit on 50% or 70%. But I think the answer to that is quite obvious. Well, look at these grades. And when you're talking about grades of 500 plus grams per ton silver with a nice gold kicker of 1 to 3 grams with solid antimony and lead and zinc bonuses, well, you have your answer. The grade is worth it. You know, it's worth the effort to hone in on the ore body. Is that right?
Absolutely. And understanding that, like hole 6, that you got everything that you needed to, but the silver. And I know when I was working and working on my PhD, I knew that the concept was, if you drill and you hit the structure, the geologist is a little bit excited. You get the quartz vein and they're a little bit more thrilled. You get the quartz vein and the sulfides, the right sulfides, and they're ecstatic. They consider that a hit until the assays come back. And then it's kind of, we hope it will, or we hope. Well, if you don't get the assays, that's not a miss. That's a miss at that location. But what you're doing is you're building the story. You now know where the structure is. You know where the quartz mineralization is coming in, where the sulfides that you want to see in the quartz veins occur. That's a great place to look. That's where you should be doing these things. And we have to get that story out.
Okay, very good. I definitely, this story needs more attention. It needs more time. It needs more love and care. So we're going to go a little longer here, maybe another 20 minutes, because I think it's important. Next order of business is the Bulldog. So what happened at the Bulldog? Because, you know, when I read the news release, I said 1350 is pretty good. That's pretty good. If this was just 3 holes from 1350 in this news release, I think investors might have liked it. But what happened at Bulldog, guys?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that I've been thinking about for a bit myself. And the 1350, you know, I've been, you know, I wouldn't say scratching my head, because I think there's a few factors, and going into that, I guess, you know, I could preface it just by saying a number of things. From those that aren't as familiar, the Bulldog is a very well endowed surface cut, there's, I've sampled that surface. We have that high grade band. The thing we're talking about, the 1350, it exists. It's sticking out of the ground at the Bulldog, and it's 10 to 15 centimeters wide, of thousands of grams silver and high antimony, and it looked like a home run. And when we drilled it, it was the very first. So we had 4 drill holes planned underneath this target, and it was the very first drill holes of the program. And a couple of factors went into play. One being that there's obviously some structures that we still need to understand better at the Bulldog. And so I'm still quite optimistic at the target. The first 4 drill holes haven't shown high grade, but I think there's a couple factors, primarily this shear zone that I was picturing quite vertically, and that from most of our geological interpretations is quite vertical, was dipping quite shallowly towards the drill. So this meant that when we were drilling our first ever drill hole on this property, which meant new rocks to us, new rocks to our drillers, and I don't want to fault our drillers, but what happens is you're learning a lot of systems. Drill hole 1, new zone, new property. And rather than intercepting the shear zone at 60, 70 meters depth, where it's going to be more consolidated and solid, it appeared to be dipping very shallowly towards the drill. So when we drilled, we got into the shear zone at 25, 30 meters, which was much closer to the drill pad than we had anticipated. That meant that the rock was quite broken up and oxidized and crumbly, essentially. So for starters, we had fairly poor recovery on those first drill holes, which was, what does that mean for those of you that don't know? A drill is constantly has water being churned down the drill to help with lubrication and cooling. And what happens when you have these soft zones is that they might get washed away in the drill cuttings, you call it. So the water that gets pulled back up, it might wash away your sulfides, and all your silver is now gone out into a holding tank. So that was step 1. That poor recovery, we could have very easily missed some of these high grade bands that would have taken the Bulldog results from mediocre to amazing. So that's step 1. That was something that we recognized at the start, but we weren't sure exactly how it was going to play out. I guess step 2 was just the structures. There's something going on here that we don't fully understand. Maybe there's a step over, maybe there's a fault, a displacement, because the stuff that I've seen at surface there does not match what we saw in the drill core. And so at the end of the day, we got to go back and do some more work. And I'm still quite bullish on what we see at surface. Something that we've talked about internally is the fact that we've drilled 4 drill holes from one side. If I was to go back again, I would probably push a road onto the other side of the showing. Given that these is early days and we don't have a great understanding of structures, a drill hole from east to west could be very enlightening. And, it might tell us something that we don't know. It might show us that it is actually a totally bifurcating system that, could be that high grade streak could be dipping away from us and we actually never even hit it. So there's things to be learned there that I think, leave me still quite optimistic. Obviously, results were not what we had hoped, but it doesn't mean it's not there. I see it at surface, and that's 2 kilometers away from the 1350 zone, and I'm still quite positive on the whole strike length potential. And by no means does it cap the strike length. We still have great showings to the north of it as well. So I think it's just a matter of a learning process with the drillers ourselves, the structures. We got much better recovery when we drilled east to west versus west to east. So that's something we'll take moving forward as well.
To explain to the investor who may not have ever been on a drill program before, when you say poor recoveries, it's basically the rocks are heavily fractured and broken up such that it's difficult to even sample the core and send it to the lab. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's oxidized, it's broken, it's your drill core, I guess. Yeah, for those that don't know, it's it's essentially a HQ core is like a can of Coke or a beer can for those. And so you're really just picking this much of that whole area that you're trying to get a handle on. And when that's fractured up like a bunch of dominoes stacked together, you're going to be grinding away at some of those, and it's going to get lost. And you might have, sulfides are quite soft, so they're going to be the first thing to go in the water circulation. So definitely an important concept to understand, that also, outside of a lot of people are looking at news releases, they're looking at drill tables, and they might not understand all the logistics and possible everything from what goes to the lab, how it's cut at the core shack, and all these other factors that go into things that might affect what's actually in the ground, from a difference between drill table and the reality of the geology. So helping people understand that. And something I should mention is that we recognize this as an issue for holes 1 and 2. And when we moved to the new site, we actually started taking sludge samples, which is essentially it's not an exact science, but we're collecting the water that was coming off the drill to see if it was carrying silver, gold, lead, zinc, the minerals in the water that was getting washed into the sump. And so we have sent those for assays as well, and assays are pending on those. And I don't think it's going to be, because it's quite rough. You don't know exactly where that water is coming from, where things settling at the bottom of the drill hole, top of the drill hole, but it's going to be internally helpful to help us understand if recovery was a major issue at the Bulldog. And it's all part of the learning process. It's exploration, and as long as we're learning from our mistakes, which is exactly what we're doing.
Very good. Okay, so that was Bulldog. So my takeaway there is that what you see at surface is too good to give up on that target entirely, but some more work and thought has to be done on that target before you put another hole into it. Got it. So 1350, we went through Bulldog, we got through Birdie. Tell us about Birdie.
Yeah, so Birdie was a similar, assays are not out yet. They're still pending as well. That last news release went out, I guess. Depends when this goes live. But yeah, the Bulldog, we were rushing into the assays for the 1350. And so the assays for the Birdie are actually still just coming back. We didn't finish the program until the end of October. But the work that was done there was a similar target, let's say, to the Bulldog. There's a couple adits that have been worked in the early 1900s. And it's one of the only ones that's open. I've been underground in there. It's only about 30 meters long, but there's a nice sheer vein there that's got good gold, good silver in it. And we drilled 4 holes underneath that, and we'll wait to tell you about those once we got the assays in, and I can do the full interpretation of the geology and the grades.
Okay, very good. And so if we take it, in its entirety, what you learned from phase 1 at Greyhound and looking forward to 2026, how would you prioritize the various zones, and where will you drill next?
Yeah, great question. That's what everyone's kind of here for, is what's the next step. And I think it's very important for people to understand, I think expectations wise, the fact the property had historic mining, I think sets expectations pretty high, and it set expectations high for us too. And we're pleased with what we've got, but this was still a maiden program. It was 1,600 meters. It wasn't a huge program. And we think this property deserves a whole heck of a lot more drilling than that, especially as we've been talking about in these inhomogeneous systems. And so, from a learning standpoint, it's been a lot of, you're learning about the structures, you're learning about the geology, you're learning about the dikes, which orientations are going. So it'll help us move into next year with more confidence on our drill targets. What are those drill targets going to be? The 1350 is undoubtedly a great target that we're going to spend more time on. We want to take that thing to depth. Let's take it to the center of the earth, and hopefully prove out something there that people can start to feel pretty confident about ounces in the ground, because that's what we're doing here. Secondary to that, as we mentioned, yes, the Bulldog, we need to do some more work there, but it's still a great target that I think deserves more work. Outside of that, there's also a number of other targets. As I was mentioning earlier, something like the Akita is the best soil sample on the whole property. That's samples that have gone over the 1350, gone over the Bulldog, gone over the Birdie, and it's never been drilled. In fact, it's never even had anyone work on it. So there's targets, there's the Ridge Cut, there's the Republican, which I took some rock samples from this year that are pending, but I saw great mineralization there, and we've taken a few historically. So Republican's a great target, and I think something I want to get across, although I wouldn't call them low-hanging fruit, but this year was very much a program of, okay, we've got road access to some of these showings, and let's find out, let's learn. And so that's what we did. It was 1,600 meters. We probably would have liked to drill a little more. There was, snow that comes in at this elevation that did push us out, and we're excited to go back there next year with hopefully bigger drill plans. And yeah, we need a lot more drilling, and the targets, the Ridge Cut, I mean, I could just keep going. There's within the 1350 zone, now that we've proved up that, okay, this historic work that was done underground is actually pretty reliable. There's the 500 zone, there's the 1450 zone. There's a number of targets within that trend that we also feel quite confident putting a drill on. And so the 3.5 kilometers in a system where, let's put it, compared to Lucky Friday, which has a surface strike length of 600, 500 meters, and we're playing with 3.5 kilometers of strike length potential. So the idea is to find more 1350s, and we're quite confident that we can do that with more drilling next year, and ironed out logistics and ironed out contractors and all the other things that go on behind the scene to make the next program more efficient and more successful.
With Akita, what is so special about that soil anomaly? I mean, you really pointed that one out, in specific. What is so attractive about the Akita target?
I mean, I think soils are just something that, sure, they can be transported, but it's a pretty small basin. And I trust geochemistry more than I trust geophysics. And
okay.
I think fundamentally, you've just got a big zone it's some of the best antimony. Well, it is the best antimony in the soils. It's the best silver in soils. It's probably the best lead, zinc, gold in soils off the top of my head. And so it's got all the ingredients that's telling you it's there. And they're taken perpendicular to the slope and perpendicular to the structure. The soil samples are. And it's also like, well, I'm looking at my computer screen, but it's something like 75 to 100 meters across is the soil anomaly, which is quite extensive for something that we're talking on the meter scale. So obviously there's some spreading and dilution side to side, but right now it shows size and it shows grade, and it's never even been looked at. So it's never been drilled. So it's just that blue sky that we all kind of are in this game for. That's exciting. Things have never been drilled, and you hope that it's off to the races there as well.
Yeah, the soil anomaly really pops there. It stands out, and that's slide 15 in the corporate presentation. Dave, we're wrapping it up here, but I just want you mentioned porphyry earlier. So we have the private patented ground, which is this 3,600 meter strike extent shear zone, but Metallis has much more ground. What work would you like to see carried out across the entire property? And is it possible there's a porphyry here somewhere?
Well, one of the shortcomings here is I have not set foot on the property. So I'm speaking from total ignorance when I start speculating on what might be there. I've sat in the room with Carl and Dave and Fiore and others, and looked at things and done what if. And the soil anomaly is great, but one of the adages in geology is you never drill a geochem anomaly, not a soil anomaly. That's kind of a forbidden thing. You need something physically tied to the earth, not something that moves around on it. But yeah, we don't understand the full geology here. Are there intrusions in the area? Yes. Could they develop porphyries? Well, we don't know how many and what kind of intrusions there are. And if they're blind, we just be randomly guessing. So the there is a lot of potential. What we know is that there was a fluid system carrying economic elements and depositing them in concentrations that have been mineable, have been economic in the past. We just need to find a lot more of those. We have certain techniques to do it, but drilling in and of itself is not going to tell the whole story. We need a lot more than that. So going into the next program, as a director and a technical advisor, I'll see what Carl and Dave recommend. I mean, I still report to the board as well as to Dave Dupre. This guy understands things. So they will make the recommendations, and I'll point to each drill hole and I say, well, what are you going to get in this one? And don't tell me we don't know. Because if you don't know what you're going to get, or at least have an idea, what is a successful program, don't do it. Don't go prospecting with a drill. That's a very expensive way to prospect. Do the soils, do the geophysics, do the mapping, maybe do the trenching, maybe refine your geophysics. Carl mentioned IP, which is a great way to find disseminated mineralization, and sulfide concentrations. But we have PhD geophysicists with many decades of experience guiding us. We'll talk to the smartest people we can find, and they'll come up with a good program that will develop this project.
There was a news release in early November that described the drill program as a success. What did you mean by that? I think that a lot of speculators in junior mining, when they see a company talk about a success, they immediately think that there must be a drill hole that's just out of this world. What was your intention in terms of using that word to characterize the first phase program?
Yeah, well, Dave, I'm going to speak just quickly. I'll let you round it out. I think obviously we came out to test 3 drill targets on the Greyhound property, and outside of geological success, you're learning something every single hole. Broadly speaking, we had great contractors, we had a great team, we established a camp, we put in new roads, we did all these things that are going to make future years more efficient, and we did it without any injuries. We did it with a team that stuck together, and that in itself is an operational success. And then we drilled good grades. Honestly, we're proud of the 1350, and we're proud that we've pulled out this what feels like a continuous body of potential mineralized shoot, let's call it, that has dimensions and obviously some very good grades. So those things to us are success, and obviously it's exploration, and I think the expectations are high, and that's okay. They're allowed to be high, and that's that's what the game is, and we want it to be high too, and we're going to keep driving to be the best that we can, and to find add the most value through the next drill holes and the next programs. But yeah, ultimately we're always learning. It's exploration. It's never going to be 100 out of 100, as Dave was pointed out. 1 out of 3 in these types of systems is a success for us, and we look forward to expanding on it and working next year. And to us, that's exactly what we're supposed to do as a junior mining company that's trying to create value for its shareholders. So in that sense, to me, it's the next step in the process. It's an early, it's only 1,600 meters, so we've got a lot more drilling to do that I think will provide fruitful moving forward.
And then final question, I'll have Dave take a shot at it first, and then we'll go back to Carl to close it out. How is the company for funding, timing of next phase of drilling at Greyhound, and the funding of that next phase of drilling? And then just what should investors look forward to in 2026 from the company?
Okay, I heard 3 questions there, and the very easiest one on the financing side is just to refer everything to Fiore regarding the financings. He keeps his hands right up to date on what we can do, when we can do it, and what's the right time to do it. Those proposals are made to the board, and we accept, reject, debate, whatever. So I'll not dodge that, but I'll say Fiore will answer that. For the next program, I'd like to see a lot more drilling. I did want to comment on it was a success. Well, there's never a failure on a drill program. If you show that there's absolutely nothing there, then you succeeded. You're not going to waste your time. We had 3 areas that were drilled. We'll find out about Birdie later. I haven't seen a single assay on it. This is something that is coming in, and when it's compiled and checked, then I get a chance to peek at it. But we got economically significant grades over similar to what you see in the other major producing mines in Idaho. We've got similar widths as the veins that are currently being exploited at the major mines in Idaho. That is fantastic. That is a terrific success. At Bulldog, we've heard Carl explain that he's a little confused, doesn't quite know. It might be this, it might be that. What we do know is we're not going to keep doing the same thing. So we will assess it in more detail and come up with a solution. And if there's absolutely nothing there, it's going to be one of life's mysteries. How can you have it so good on surface and have it disappear at depth? I don't believe that happens, and I wouldn't bet against that, ever. So I think those are the 3 touches, 3 topics that you wanted to talk about. And if I missed something, maybe Carl can fill it in.
Yeah, I think you did good, Dave. Yeah, I think you did good. I guess just what do we look forward to in 2026, Carl?
Yeah, I think obviously it's drilled season again, you know, and we would love to have the market give us a whole bunch of money to do this property the justice that it deserves. And you know, we drilled 11 holes. We would love to come out and next year it's 30. You know, we've got big plans. The 1350 itself needs a handful of holes, and there's a number of other targets. So I think just big picture, we'll see. You know, I'll stay away from the financing side too, exactly when and what that looks like. But the plan is for sure next spring to be out there. It's going to be surface work and, you know, more soil samples. I think the fact that soil samples have worked so well, I'd like to refine those grids, and it's more drilling. And because that's what this property needs in a system like this that's not totally homogeneous. And yeah, looking forward to it. I think Dan Yonke is behind it. He's the property owner. Like I said, he's super excited about it as well. And internally, we're all pleased. So we're looking to keep ramping, and we're happy to be working in Idaho and with the contractors we've established. So all systems ahead, and it's going to be a bigger program testing new targets as well, expanding on the 1350. So yeah, looking forward to it, really.
Thank you, gentlemen. Carl, Dave, cheers. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Robert. Nice chatting.
Thank you. Merry Christmas all. Bye.